Samber, Housewife's confession. When I thought divorce was the only way out. In the quiet suburbs of Portland, Oregon, 34-year-old Melissa Chen-Rodriguez finds herself trapped in what appears to be the perfect American dream. Married to ambitious tech executive David Rodriguez for 12 years, mother to 8-year-old twins Emma and Lucas, she has everything society says she should want. Yet beneath the pristine facade of her colonial-style home lies a woman suffocating under the weight of unspoken expectations and forgotten dreams. When Melissa discovers divorce papers hidden in David's briefcase, her world crumbles. But instead of confrontation, she embarks on a journey of self-discovery that will challenge everything she believed about love, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be fulfilled. Through unexpected friendships, long-buried passions, and the courage to speak her truth, Melissa must decide whether to save her marriage or save herself. This is a story about finding your voice when you've been silent too long, about the complexity of modern relationships, and about discovering that sometimes the person you need to rescue is yourself. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and if my story touched your heart today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next confession. Give this video a like if it resonated with you, and share it with another woman who needs to know she's not alone. Together, our voices are stronger. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. The morning light filtered through the gauze curtains of the Rodriguez family's kitchen, casting soft shadows across the granite countertops that Melissa had once been so proud of. She moved with practiced efficiency, preparing breakfast for her family while the local news droned from the tablet propped against the coffee maker. Another beautiful October morning in Cedar Hills, where the maple trees were just beginning to turn their brilliant shades of amber and crimson. "Mom, Emma took my lucky pencil again." Lucas's voice carried down the hallway, followed by the thunder of small feet on hardwood floors. "I did not. It's my pencil." Emma's indignant reply echoed back. Melissa sighed, her shoulders tensing as she flipped pancakes on the griddle. At 34, she felt decades older some mornings. The arguments, the scheduling, the endless cycle of managing everyone else's needs, while her own seemed to evaporate like steam from her coffee cup. "Kids, breakfast is ready. No fighting at the table," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone that mothers everywhere had perfected. Firm, but weary. David emerged from their bedroom, already dressed in his charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly styled despite having just woken up 20 minutes ago. He had that enviable ability to look put together instantly, something that had attracted her when they'd met at Portland State University 15 years ago. Now, watching him check his phone while walking, she wondered when he'd stopped looking at her with the same attention he gave his email. "Conference call moved up to 8:30, he announced, reaching for his travel mug without looking up from his screen. "Might be late tonight again. The Singapore team is pushing hard on the deadline." Melissa nodded, adding it to the mental checklist that never seemed to end. Soccer practice for Lucas at 4, Emma's parent-teacher conference at 5:30, grocery shopping somewhere in between, and now dinner alone with the kids again. She'd stopped counting how many evenings she'd spent reheating David's dinner, waiting for him to come home to a family that had already moved on without him. "Mrs. Patterson called yesterday," she said, placing a stack of pancakes in front of him. "She wants to know if we can host the neighborhood barbecue this year. I told her I'd check with you." David finally looked up, his brown eyes distracted. "What? Oh, sure. Whatever works for you. You handle all that stuff better than I do anyway." The casual dismissal stung more than it should have. All that stuff? As if maintaining their social connections, their children's friendships, their place in the community was some trivial hobby rather than the foundation that kept their lives stable. Emma bounced into the kitchen, her dark curls still messy from sleep, wearing the purple dress that was her current favorite. Lucas followed, dragging his backpack and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else than getting ready for 3rd grade. "Dad, are you coming to my class presentation on Friday?" Emma asked, climbing onto her chair and immediately reaching for the syrup. "When's that again?" David asked, though Melissa had reminded him twice already this week. "Friday at 10. I'm presenting my report on monarch butterflies." Emma's face glowed with excitement. She'd been working on the project for weeks, carefully researching migration patterns and creating a poster board that now dominated one corner of the living room. "I'll try, sweetheart. Work's been crazy lately." Melissa watched Emma's face fall slightly, that barely perceptible dimming of enthusiasm that children experience when their expectations meet adult reality. She wanted to reach across the table and shake David to make him see what his constant unavailability was doing to their daughter, to all of them. "I'll be there," Melissa said quickly, reaching over to squeeze Emma's hand. "And I'll take lots of pictures to show Dad later." "It's not the same," Emma mumbled, but she managed a small smile. David's phone buzzed insistently, and he stood up, his breakfast half finished. "That's Jerry. I've got to take this." He paused at the doorway, finally seeming to register the disappointed faces around the table. "I'm sorry, Em. I'll make it up to you. Okay?" After he disappeared into his home office, the kitchen felt both quieter and somehow more relaxed. Melissa finished making the kids' lunches, listening to their chatter about school friends and weekend plans, trying to push down the familiar cocktail of resentment and loneliness that seemed to accompany every morning routine. The drive to Westview Elementary was crisp and clear, the kind of fall morning that made Portland famous. Melissa loved this time of year, when the air carried hints of wood smoke and the promise of cozy evenings. She used to dream of family hikes in the Cascades, hot chocolate by the fireplace, maybe even a weekend getaway to the coast. But David's work schedule had made those dreams feel increasingly naive. "Mom, are you okay?" Lucas asked from the back seat as they pulled up to the school's drop-off lane. At 8, he was already showing signs of being the more observant twin, the one who noticed when adults were struggling to keep their masks in place. "Of course, honey. Just thinking about all the things I need to do today." She turned to smile at both kids. "Have an amazing day, okay? I love you both." After watching them disappear into the brick building, Melissa sat in her silver SUV for a moment longer than necessary. Around her, other parents were executing the same ritual, some rushing off to demanding careers, others like her heading back to houses that would feel too quiet until 3 o'clock. She'd once had plans too, a degree in graphic design, dreams of starting her own studio, maybe focusing on sustainable packaging or nonprofit branding. But Lucas and Emma had arrived earlier than expected, and David's career had been taking off, and somehow it had made sense for her to be the one to step back. Temporarily, they'd said, just until the kids were older. That was 8 years ago. The house felt cavernous when she returned. She moved through her daily routine, tidying up breakfast dishes, starting a load of laundry, making beds that would just be unmade again in 12 hours. The silence was broken only by the hum of appliances and the occasional car passing on Maple Street. At 11, she decided to tackle David's office, something she normally avoided since his work papers were scattered across every surface in what he claimed was an organized system. But their house cleaner was coming tomorrow, and Melissa wanted to at least clear the coffee mugs and water glasses that had accumulated. She was reaching for a glass behind his monitor when she accidentally knocked over a stack of manila folders, papers scattered across the floor, and as she knelt to gather them, her eyes caught on something that made her blood freeze. Dissolution of marriage. The header on the legal document was stark black against white paper, impossibly formal and final. Below it, in David's familiar handwriting, were notes in the margins. Custody arrangements. Asset division. Timeline. After holidays. Melissa's hands shook as she read through the preliminary paperwork. It was thorough, detailed, and clearly something David had been working on for weeks, maybe months. The dates on some of the documents went back to August. She sank into David's desk chair, the papers scattered around her feet like the remnants of a life she thought she understood. How long had he been planning this? How many conversations, dinners, bedtime stories had he participated in while secretly consulting divorce attorneys? The betrayal felt physical, a sharp pain beneath her ribs that made it hard to breathe. But underneath the shock was something else, something she wasn't prepared to acknowledge yet. Was it relief? Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Lunch meeting running long? Don't wait up for dinner." Melissa stared at the message, at the casual way he was continuing to live their normal life while preparing to end it. She thought about responding, about confronting him right then via text. Instead, she carefully gathered the papers, put them back exactly as she'd found them, and went upstairs to their bedroom. In the mirror above their dresser, she looked at herself. Really looked, for the first time in months. When had those lines appeared around her eyes? When had her brown hair started showing gray at the temples? She'd been so busy taking care of everyone else that she'd become invisible to herself. Her reflection looked like a stranger, a woman she might have felt sorry for if she'd met her at the grocery store or school pickup, Tired, forgotten, going through the motions of a life that was happening to her rather than being lived by her. The afternoon passed in a blur of routine activities that now felt surreal. Picking up the kids, listening to their school stories, helping with homework at the kitchen table while dinner simmered on the stove. Every normal moment felt like it was happening through glass, distant and fragile. "Where's Dad?" Emma asked as they sat down to eat. "Working late again," Melissa replied, the lie feeling heavier than usual. "He's always working," Lucas said matter-of-factly, cutting his chicken into precise squares the way he'd done since he was 4. "Dad works hard so we can have nice things," Melissa found herself saying, the response automatic after years of making excuses for David's absences. "I'd rather have Dad than nice things," Emma said quietly, and something inside Melissa's chest cracked a little wider. After the kids were in bed, Melissa poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the back deck. The October air was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of burning leaves from somewhere in the neighborhood. She could hear the distant sounds of other families, a dog barking, children laughing, the low murmur of adult conversation. When David finally came home at nearly 10 o'clock, she was still sitting there, the wine barely touched. "Hey," he said, sliding the door open. "You okay? You seem what?" She turned to look at him, this man she'd shared her life with for 12 years. Father of her children, keeper of secrets that could shatter everything they'd built. "I don't know. Different." He loosened his tie, the gesture so familiar it was almost like watching a recording of their life. "Long day?" "You could say that." Something in her tone made him pause. For a moment she thought he might ask her what was wrong, might sit down beside her and talk to her like he used to when they were young, and still believed they could solve anything together. Instead, he yawned. "I'm exhausted. This Singapore project is killing me. I'm going to head up to bed." After he disappeared inside, Melissa remained on the deck until her wine glass was empty and the neighbors' lights had all gone dark. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of the MAX train carrying people toward Portland's city center, toward lives and dreams and possibilities that felt as foreign to her as another planet. Tomorrow, she would have to decide what to do with the knowledge that was now burning inside her chest. But tonight, she allowed herself to sit in the darkness and finally acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding for years. She'd been disappearing long before she'd found those divorce papers. The question now was whether it was too late to find her way back. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest weather that matched Melissa's mood perfectly. She'd barely slept, her mind cycling through the same questions. How long had David been planning this? What had she missed? And the most terrifying question of all, what was she going to do now? She moved through the morning routine on autopilot, her interactions with the kids, and David feeling like she was acting in a play where everyone else knew their lines but her. David seemed completely normal, kissing her cheek goodbye and reminding her about the parent-teacher conference that evening as if he wasn't secretly planning to destroy their family. "I might actually make it to Emma's presentation on Friday," he said, checking his phone. "Looks like the Singapore call got moved." Emma's face lit up from across the kitchen island. "Really? You promise?" "I'll do my best, sweetheart." Melissa watched this exchange with new eyes, wondering if David was trying to create positive final memories, or if he was simply delaying the inevitable guilt he'd feel after he left. Either way, the casual deception made her stomach turn. After dropping the kids at school, instead of heading straight home, Melissa found herself driving toward downtown Portland. She needed space to think, and their house felt too small, too full of David's presence and hidden secrets. She parked near Pioneer Square and walked aimlessly through the city streets, letting the light rain soak through her jacket. Portland had always felt like home to her, even more than the small coastal town where she'd grown up. She and David had spent their early dating years exploring food trucks, browsing Powell's books, hiking in Forest Park. When had they stopped doing things together? When had their relationship become nothing more than coordinated logistics? She found herself standing in front of a small art gallery in the Pearl District, looking at a painting in the window, an abstract piece in deep blues and grays that somehow captured exactly how she felt. Lost, turbulent, beautiful in its chaos. It's stunning, isn't it? Melissa turned to find a woman about her age standing beside her, also studying the painting. She had short auburn hair with streaks of silver, paint-stained fingers, and the kind of confident posture that Melissa envied. "It is," Melissa agreed. "There's something about it that feels honest." The woman smiled. "I'm Sage Morrison. I painted it." "Oh," Melissa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. That's exactly what I was hoping people would feel." Sage gestured toward the gallery door. "Want to see the rest of the collection? I'm here setting up for the opening tomorrow night." Melissa almost said no, falling back on the automatic responses that had become her default. She had grocery shopping to do, laundry to fold, a house to maintain. But something about Sage's easy confidence, and maybe the way the universe seemed to be pushing her toward new experiences, made her nod instead. The gallery was small but beautifully curated, filled with Sage's work. Paintings that ranged from realistic landscapes to abstract emotional explosions. Each piece seemed to tell a story about transformation, about finding beauty in difficult transitions. "This is my Phoenix series," Sage explained, gesturing to a wall of canvases that progressed from dark, turbulent images to ones filled with light and movement. "I painted these during my divorce 3 years ago." Melissa's breath caught. "Your divorce?" 22 years of marriage ended when I finally realized I'd forgotten who I was outside of being someone's wife and someone's mother. Sage's voice held no bitterness, only hard-won wisdom. "Scariest and best thing I ever did for myself." They spent the next hour talking, and Melissa found herself sharing more than she'd intended. Not about the divorce papers, she wasn't ready for that, but about feeling invisible, about dreams deferred, about the strange sensation of watching her own life happen without her active participation. "I used to want to be a graphic designer," Melissa heard herself saying. "I had all these ideas about sustainable packaging, working with environmental nonprofits, but then the kids came, and David's career took off, and it just seemed like the practical thing was for me to step back." "What's stopping you from stepping forward again?" Sage asked, genuinely curious rather than judgmental. The question hung in the air between them. What was stopping her? Fear, mostly. Fear of failure, fear of being selfish, fear of disrupting the carefully constructed life they'd built. But also something else. The fear that she'd waited too long, that the person she used to be was gone forever. "I should get going," Melissa said, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of possibility that Sage's question had opened up. "Thank you for sharing your work with me. It's really beautiful." "Take this," Sage said, handing her a postcard with one of her paintings on it. "That's my contact information on the back. I teach some workshops, painting, but also life coaching for women going through transitions. If you ever want to talk, or just need someone who understands." Driving home through the familiar neighborhoods of Cedar Hills, Melissa felt like she was seeing everything with new eyes. The perfectly manicured lawns, the matching mailboxes, the SUVs parked in circular driveways. It all looked like a movie set, beautiful, but somehow not quite real. At Emma's parent-teacher conference that evening, Melissa sat alone in the tiny plastic chair across from Mrs. Hamilton, Emma's third-grade teacher. David had texted at the last minute, another emergency at work. "Emma is a delight," Mrs. Hamilton said, spreading out examples of Emma's work across the desk. "She's creative, compassionate, and academically strong, but I have noticed she seems a bit anxious lately. She's been asking a lot of questions about families, about what happens when parents fight." Melissa's heart sank. Have she and Lucas been talking about David and me fighting? Not fighting exactly. But children are very perceptive. They sense tension even when adults think they're hiding it well. Mrs. Hamilton leaned forward kindly. "Is everything all right at home?" The question was asked with such genuine concern that Melissa almost broke down right there in the elementary school classroom. Instead, she managed to say, "We're going through some challenges, but we're working on it." It wasn't exactly a lie. They were working on it. David by consulting divorce attorneys, and Melissa by trying to figure out who she was supposed to be in the aftermath of discovering her marriage was ending. That night, after the kids were asleep, Melissa made a decision. She needed to know more about what David was planning, not to sabotage it necessarily, but to understand her options. She waited until she heard him in the shower, then slipped into his office. This time, she looked more carefully through the papers. There were emails printed out from his attorney, discussions about custody arrangements that seemed to assume she would want primary custody of the twins, Notes about dividing their assets, including the house that she'd put so much energy into making a home. There was even a timeline. David was apparently planning to have the conversation with her in January, after the holidays. The clinical detachment of it all was what hurt most. Her marriage, their family, their life together reduced to bullet points and legal strategies. She wondered if he'd already told people at work, if he'd been discussing their private struggles with colleagues while she'd remained in the dark. But there was something else in the pile of papers that made her pause. A financial document that outlined their assets and debts, something she hadn't seen before. According to this paperwork, they had significantly more savings than she'd realized. Enough that she wouldn't be left destitute if they divorced. Enough that she might actually be able to start over. The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended state. Melissa went through all the motions of her normal life, while internally feeling like she was preparing for an earthquake. She researched divorce lawyers on her phone during school pickup, looked up apartments for rent while doing laundry, and found herself studying her children's faces, trying to memorize these last moments of their innocence before their world changed forever. On Friday, both she and David made it to Emma's presentation. Watching their daughter beam as she explained monarch butterfly migration patterns, Melissa felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. Whatever happened between her and David, she would make sure the kids were okay. They deserved better than parents who were just going through the motions. "She did great," David whispered to her as they walked back to their cars after the presentation. For a moment, they felt like a team again, proud parents united in their love for their daughter. "David," Melissa said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "Are you happy?" He paused, his hand on his car door handle. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you happy with our life, with our marriage, with the way things are?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or fear. "That's a loaded question, Mel. Are you?" She almost said yes, the automatic response that would keep them both safe from difficult truths. Instead, she said, "I don't know. I haven't been happy in a long time, and I'm not sure you have been either." They stood there in the elementary school parking lot, other families flowing around them, and for the first time in months, they really looked at each other. "We should talk," David said finally. "Really talk." "Yes," Melissa agreed. "We should." But even as they made plans for a serious conversation that weekend, Melissa knew that the time for saving their marriage might already have passed. The question now was whether they could end it with enough honesty and grace to preserve what mattered most, their children's sense of security and their own ability to someday look back on their 12 years together with gratitude rather than bitterness. That night, after David fell asleep, Melissa took out Sage's postcard and studied the painting again. In the darkness of her bedroom, surrounded by the detritus of a life she was still pretending to live, she made another decision. Tomorrow, she would call Sage. She would start figuring out who Melissa Chen-Rodriguez was when she wasn't defined by her relationships to other people. It was time to save herself. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Saturday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine, the kind of brilliant October day that made Portland feel like the most beautiful city in the world. Melissa woke early, before David and the kids, and stood at their bedroom window looking out at their backyard. The Japanese maple she'd planted when they first moved in was now a gorgeous canopy of red and gold, and she realized with a pang that she might not be here to see it next fall. David stirred behind her, and she heard him check his phone. The same morning ritual that had annoyed her for years, but now felt like watching a stranger's habits. "We still on for that talk today?" he asked, his voice still rough with sleep. "After soccer," she confirmed. "Emma has her game at 10, Lucas has practice at noon. We can talk when they're both occupied this afternoon." They moved through the morning with unusual politeness, both of them seeming to sense that they were walking through the last hours of their marriage as they knew it. Melissa made French toast, David's favorite, while he read the newspaper on his tablet. The kids chattered about their plans for the weekend, blissfully unaware that their parents were preparing to reshape their entire world. Emma's soccer game was at Bethany Community Park, and Melissa found herself paying closer attention than usual to the other parents. She'd always felt slightly outside this group. The soccer moms with their matching team sweatshirts and elaborate snack schedules. But today she wondered what their lives were really like behind the enthusiastic cheering and organized carpools. How many of them were also going through the motions of marriages that had become more like business partnerships? "Great save, Emma!" David shouted from beside her on the bleachers, genuinely engaged in a way that reminded Melissa why she'd fallen in love with him. When he wasn't distracted by work stress, he could still be the warm, attentive man she'd married. That might be what made this so hard. It wasn't that David was a bad person. They'd just grown into incompatible versions of themselves. After the game, they drove separately to Lucas's practice. Melissa used the 20-minute drive to call Sage, finally working up the courage to reach out. "I was hoping you'd call," Sage said when she picked up. "How are you doing?" "I think my marriage is ending," Melissa found herself saying, the words spilling out before she could censor them. "I mean, I know it's ending. I just don't know what to do about it." "Do you want it to end?" Sage asked gently. The question stopped Melissa cold. Did she? She'd been so focused on the shock of David's secret planning that she hadn't really examined her own feelings. "I don't know," she admitted. "I think I've been so busy trying to keep everything together that I forgot to notice whether I actually wanted it together." "That's more honest than most people manage in the beginning," Sage said. "Listen, I'm having a small gathering tomorrow afternoon. Just a few women who are navigating major life transitions. Nothing formal, just coffee and conversation. Would you like to join us?" Melissa almost said no. Sunday afternoons were for family time, for the elaborate brunches and park outings that looked so perfect on social media. But those same Sunday afternoons had become exercises in forced togetherness, everyone performing happiness rather than actually experiencing it. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." Lucas's soccer practice gave her and David an hour to sit in the car and finally have the conversation they'd been avoiding for months. They chose a neutral location, the parking lot overlooking the Tualatin Hills Nature Park, where they'd brought the kids hiking when they were younger and still believed in their ability to create lasting family traditions. "So," David said, turning off the engine and shifting to face her, "you asked if I was happy, and you deflected the question." He was quiet for a long moment, watching other families walk the trails below them. "I'm not unhappy," he said finally, "but I'm not happy either. I feel like I'm living someone else's life, you know? Like I'm playing the role of husband and father, but I've lost track of who David Rodriguez actually is underneath all that." The honesty surprised her. She'd expected defensiveness, maybe anger that she'd challenged their status quo. Instead, he sounded tired and sad and surprisingly reflective. "I found the divorce papers," she said quietly. David's whole body went rigid. "Mel, in your office, on Thursday." She turned to look at him, studying his face as he processed being caught. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since August," he admitted, not meeting her eyes. "I've been going to counseling, trying to figure out what I wanted. Dr. Brennan suggested I explore all my options, including legal consultation." "You've been in counseling for 2 months and didn't tell me?" "I didn't know how, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with the information yet." He finally looked at her, and she was startled to see tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mel. I'm sorry for all of it. For checking out of our marriage, for making you feel invisible, for being such a coward about dealing with this honestly." The apology she'd been waiting for, and now that it was here, it felt too little and too late. But also like a relief, this finally naming what had been wrong between them. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" she asked. "Before the lawyers, before making unilateral decisions about our family's future. Why didn't you try to fix this with me?" David was quiet for a long time. "Because I was scared you'd want to fix it, and I wasn't sure I did. Because I felt guilty for years about how much I resent our life sometimes, and I didn't want to hurt you with that. Because," he paused, struggling with the words, "because I think we both know this isn't working, and hasn't been working for a long time." The truth of it hung between them like a physical presence. Melissa felt a strange sense of relief mixed with profound sadness. They were finally being honest with each other, but the honesty was coming too late to save anything. "What about the kids?" she asked. "I want joint custody. I know my travel schedule is crazy right now, but I'm hoping to scale back. Maybe even look for a different position. I've been so focused on providing financially that I forgot they need me present more than they need the big house and private school tuition." This was the David she'd married. Thoughtful, self-aware, willing to examine his own behavior and make changes. Why had it taken the prospect of divorce to bring him back? I've been thinking about going back to school, Melissa heard herself say. Maybe pursuing graphic design again, or something related. I applied for a part-time program at PCC last week. David looked surprised. You did? I've been thinking about a lot of things lately. About who I used to be before I became David's wife and the twins' mom. She surprised herself with how steady her voice sounded. I love being their mom, but I think I forgot how to be anything else. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching families walk the nature trails below. It occurred to Melissa that this was the most honest conversation they'd had in years, and it was happening because their marriage was ending, not because they were trying to save it. So, what now? David asked finally. I don't know. I guess we figure out how to do this as kindly as possible, for Emma and Lucas. I don't want them to think this is their fault. They won't, Melissa said with more confidence than she felt. Kids are resilient. And maybe they'll be better off with parents who are honest about their feelings rather than parents who are just pretending everything is fine. When they picked up Lucas from practice, he immediately sensed the shift between them. Did you guys have a fight? He asked as they walked to their cars. Not a fight, Melissa said carefully. But we did have an important conversation. Dad and I are going to need to have some more talks about our family. Okay? Lucas nodded seriously, and Melissa was struck again by how perceptive he was. She wondered how long he'd been sensing the tension between his parents, how much of their performance of normalcy had actually been fooling anyone. That evening, while David took the kids to a movie, Melissa found herself alone in the house that had been her entire world for so many years. She walked through each room, seeing it with new eyes. The living room they'd painted 3 different colors trying to get it right. The kitchen where she'd spent thousands of hours preparing meals for people she loved. The home office where David had been secretly planning their divorce. In her bedroom, would it still be their bedroom much longer? She opened her laptop and did something she hadn't done in years. She started designing. Nothing elaborate, just playing with fonts and colors and layouts, letting her creativity flow without worrying about whether it was good enough or practical or marketable. It felt like coming home to herself. When David and the kids returned, she could hear them laughing in the entryway, and the sound made her both happy and heartbroken. Whatever else happened, they were still a family. The structure might be changing, but the love, the complicated, imperfect, but genuine love they all had for each other, that would remain. Mom, Emma called, running up the stairs. Dad bought us ice cream and we didn't spoil our dinner because we had popcorn at the movies, so technically it was dinner. Melissa laughed, pulling her daughter close. Technically, huh? That's what Dad said. Later, after the kids were in bed, David found her at the kitchen table with her laptop still open. What are you working on? He asked, just playing around with some design ideas. She turned the screen toward him, showing him a logo concept she'd been developing for an imaginary sustainable packaging company. Mel, this is amazing. You're so talented. He looked at her with something she hadn't seen in his eyes for a long time. Respect, admiration, maybe even a little bit of the wonder that had drawn them together in the first place. Thank you. They stood there in their kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of their shared life, and Melissa realized that this was how she wanted to remember them. Not as the bitter, exhausted couple they'd become, but as 2 people who had loved each other once and were now brave enough to admit when that love had changed into something else. I think we're going to be okay, she said softly. Yeah, David agreed. I think we are. Chapter 4. New Beginnings. 3 months later, on a crisp January morning, Melissa stood in the doorway of her new apartment in Portland's Hawthorne district, watching Emma and Lucas arrange their weekend backpacks in what would be their temporary bedroom. The space was smaller than what they were used to, but it was filled with light and possibility in a way their old house had never been. Mom, can we walk to the park later? Emma asked, bouncing on the twin bed they'd set up by the window. Mrs. Chen next door said there's a playground just 3 blocks away. Of course, Melissa said, still getting used to the freedom of making spontaneous decisions without coordinating schedules and expectations. We can explore the whole neighborhood if you want. The transition had been gentler than either she or David had expected. They'd waited until after New Year's to tell the kids, spending the holidays creating positive memories and making sure Emma and Lucas felt secure in their parents' love. The conversation had been heartbreaking but honest, and both children had surprised them with their resilience and thoughtful questions. Will you and Dad be happier now? Lucas had asked, getting straight to the heart of it in the way 8-year-olds sometimes did. "We hope so," Melissa had answered. "And we think you will be too, eventually. Sometimes parents love each other but aren't good at being married anymore. That doesn't change how much we love you." David had moved into a downtown condo closer to his office, and they'd worked out a custody schedule that prioritized the kids' stability over convenience. Melissa had kept the house initially, but after a few weeks of rattling around in all that space alone, she'd realized she wanted something completely different. Something that felt like hers. The Hawthorne apartment was perfect. A 2-bedroom unit above a coffee shop with hardwood floors and built-in bookshelves and a view of Mount Hood on clear days. It was walking distance to Emma and Lucas's new school, close to Sage's art studio, and in a neighborhood that felt alive in ways Cedar Hills never had. "I still miss our old house sometimes," Emma admitted, sitting cross-legged on her bed with her favorite stuffed elephant. "But this place smells like coffee all the time, which is kind of nice." "I miss Dad's pancakes," Lucas added from where he was organizing his books on the shelf they'd assembled together yesterday. "Dad can still make pancakes," Melissa reminded him, "just at his place now, and I'm learning to make them too." The kids had adapted to the new routine with the flexibility that children possessed when the adults in their lives were honest and consistent. Weekday mornings with Mom in the cozy apartment, weekends split between parents who were now genuinely present instead of just physically there. David had surprised everyone by actually reducing his travel schedule, turning down a promotion that would have required more time away from Emma and Lucas. "I spent so many years thinking that providing financially was the most important thing I could do for them," he'd told Melissa during one of their weekly co-parenting check-ins. "I forgot they actually need me more than they need another college fund contribution." Their divorce had been finalized just before Christmas, a strangely anticlimactic ending to 12 years of marriage. They'd managed it with mediation rather than litigation, working together to divide their assets and create a parenting plan that served their children's best interests. The house had sold quickly in Portland's competitive market, giving them both the financial freedom to start over. Now, watching her kids make themselves at home in their new space, Melissa felt something she hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the future. "There's something I want to show you both," she said, pulling out her laptop and opening a file she'd been working on for weeks. Emma and Lucas crowded around her at the small dining table, studying the screen. It showed a professional website layout with Verdi Design Collective in elegant green lettering, featuring a portfolio of sustainable packaging concepts and environmental nonprofit branding. "This is my new business," Melissa announced. "I'm starting my own graphic design company, focusing on helping businesses become more environmentally friendly." "Mom, this is so cool," Emma exclaimed, scrolling through the mock-ups. "Look, Lucas, she designed a whole seed packet series." "Are you going to work from home?" Lucas asked, always practical about logistics. "Sometimes, but I'm also renting a small studio space that I'll share with 2 other designers. Mrs. Morrison, you remember Sage, helped me connect with them." What Melissa didn't tell the kids was how terrifying and exhilarating it had been to take this leap. The women's group that Sage had invited her to had become a lifeline during the divorce proceedings. 6 women at various stages of major life transitions, meeting every other Sunday to share coffee, conversation, and honest support. Through them, she'd found her courage to apply for the design program at Portland Community College, to network with other creative professionals, and eventually to take the plunge into entrepreneurship. "I already have 3 clients lined up," she continued. "A local farm that wants new branding, a nonprofit that works on river restoration, and a startup that makes reusable food containers." Her first client had come through the women's group. Janet, a recently divorced attorney who was starting a practice focused on environmental law, had needed a logo and business cards. The project had reminded Melissa why she'd loved design in the first place: the challenge of visual problem solving, the satisfaction of creating something both beautiful and functional, the joy of helping someone else bring their vision to life. "Will you make enough money?" Emma asked with the straightforward concern of an 8-year-old who'd overheard adult conversations about budgets and mortgages. "I will," Melissa said confidently. Between David's child support, her share of the house sale, and her growing client base, she was in better financial shape than she'd expected. More importantly, she was working towards something that felt meaningful rather than just paying bills. "It might take some time to build up the business, but we're going to be just fine." That afternoon, they explored their new neighborhood together. Hawthorne Boulevard was lined with vintage shops, bookstores, and restaurants that reflected Portland's famous quirkiness. They stopped for hot chocolate at a cafe where local artists displayed their work, wandered through a used bookstore that had a resident cat named Hemingway, and discovered a community garden where Emma immediately started planning what she wanted to grow in the spring. "Can we live here forever?" Lucas asked as they sat on a bench in Ladd's Addition Park, watching other families enjoy the unexpected January sunshine. "This apartment is just temporary," Melissa explained. "I'm looking for a house to buy somewhere in this area. Something smaller than what we had before, but with a yard and maybe space for a home office." "With room for Dad to visit?" Emma asked. "Of course. Dad will always be welcome in our home." It was true. The animosity and resentment that had poisoned the end of their marriage had dissipated surprisingly quickly once they'd stopped trying to force something that wasn't working. David was a good father and a decent man who'd simply grown incompatible with her. They could honor what they'd shared while acknowledging that they were better apart than together. That evening, after the kids were asleep in their new room, Melissa sat at her laptop working on a logo design for the river restoration nonprofit. Through the windows, she could hear the sounds of the city, traffic and voices, and the distant hum of life being lived. It was so different from the suburban quiet of Cedar Hills, where the silence had sometimes felt oppressive rather than peaceful. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Kids seem happy in the new place." Emma sent me 17 photos of the bookstore cat. She smiled, typing back, "Hemingway is apparently her new best friend. How was your week?" "Good. Strange, but good. I actually left the office before 7 every night. Turns out the world doesn't end when I'm not available 24/7. They'd been having these exchanges more frequently lately. Brief, friendly check-ins that focused on the kids, but sometimes wandered into their respective new lives. It was the kind of relationship Melissa had hoped they might eventually achieve. Not romantic, but respectful and genuinely supportive. "Any regrets?" She found herself typing, then deleting the message before sending it. Some questions were better left unasked. Instead, she sent, "The kids want to show you their new school next Friday when you pick them up. Emma is very proud of their art room." "I'd love that. And Mel, thank you for making this transition so graceful. I know it couldn't have been easy." She stared at the message for a long time before responding. "We're all figuring it out as we go, but I think we're figuring it out well." After ending the conversation, Melissa returned to her design work, but found herself distracted by the view from her window. She could see into other apartments across the street, glimpses of other people's lives, other stories unfolding. A woman about her age practicing yoga in her living room. A young couple cooking dinner together, laughing at something one of them had said. An elderly man reading in his armchair with a cat curled in his lap. 6 months ago, she would have looked at these scenes and felt like an outsider, someone whose life was too constrained and predictable to contain such moments of authentic joy. Now, she felt like she was part of the same human tapestry, someone who was actively creating a life rather than just enduring one. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a text from Sage. "How's the first weekend in the new place going?" "Better than I expected," Melissa replied. "Scary and exciting and right all at the same time." "That sounds like growth to me. Coffee Monday after you drop the kids at school? I'd love that." Sage had become more than a mentor. She was becoming a genuine friend. Through her, Melissa was discovering a whole community of women who were redefining their lives on their own terms. Artists and entrepreneurs, mothers and childless women, divorcees and widows, and women who'd never married. All of them choosing courage over comfort, authenticity over approval. At 34, Melissa was finally learning that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be. She worked until nearly midnight, losing herself in the flow of creative problem-solving that she'd forgotten she loved so much. When she finally closed her laptop and headed to bed, she paused in the doorway of the kids' room. Emma and Lucas were sleeping peacefully, Emma clutching her stuffed elephant, and Lucas surrounded by the books he'd arranged just so on his nightstand. They were going to be okay. All of them were going to be okay. Sunday morning brought rain, but the gentle kind that made their new apartment feel cozy rather than confining. Melissa made pancakes. They weren't quite as good as David's yet, but Emma and Lucas ate them enthusiastically anyway. And they spent the morning reading and working on art projects at the kitchen table. "Mom," Emma said as she carefully colored a drawing of their new neighborhood. "Are you happy now?" It was the same question Lucas had asked about both parents during their divorce conversation. But now it felt different. Not theoretical, but immediate and real. "Yes," Melissa said without hesitation. "I really am." And she was. Not because her life was perfect or easy or without challenges ahead, but because it was hers. Because she was actively choosing it every day rather than just letting it happen to her. Because she'd learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between being busy and being fulfilled, between having a life and living one. That afternoon, Emma and Lucas would go to David's downtown condo for the rest of the weekend. Melissa would have dinner with the women's group, sharing updates and offering support to others who were navigating their own transitions. Tomorrow, she would drop the kids at their new school, have coffee with Sage, and spend the day building her business and her new life. It wasn't the life she'd planned at 22, or even the life she'd been trying to save at 34. But it was a life she was proud to claim, a story she was excited to keep writing. Sometimes the most important thing you could do was save yourself. And sometimes, in saving yourself, you saved everyone else too. Outside, the rain continued to fall on the city she loved, on the neighborhood that was becoming home, on the life she was finally brave enough to live authentically. Melissa Chen-Rodriguez, designer, mother, woman who'd found her voice again, was exactly where she needed to be. The end. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if my story touched your heart today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next confession. Give this video a like if it resonated with you, and share it with another woman who needs to know she's not alone. Together, our voices are stronger.